Okay, so I got everything cleaned up and treated in POR 15 where I could. I got the tie rod adjustment sleeves off and cleaned up and ready to go. So I'm going to put this back together now. Before I start, I made a couple of measurements. Here's the old ball sockets. The old ball sockets are 7/16 of an inch. And the new ball sockets are 15/32. So there's 4 of them, so that's an 1/8 of an inch difference. So when I install these new ones, my end plug is going to stick out an 1/8 of an inch further than it originally did. Okay, so I'm going to reassemble the Centerlink just using a general purpose grease, and I want to make sure that where the ball sockets go, that I have 100% coverage inside the tube where all 4 ball sockets go. And again, I've laid out all my parts in the correct order according to the shop manual. And I'm going to apply the grease with a brush, and I'm going to go in from the end and reach all the way up inside and rotate the brush and work my way out. I want to make sure I have 100% coverage, but at the same time I don't want to put too much grease in there initially for the reassembly, because when I tighten the adjusting end caps down, I want to be able to seat everything properly. So the stop disc goes in first, and I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on it to act like glue. See if I can get it to stay into place. Just making sure that it's up against the detents. Next piece in is half of one of the ball sockets, and I'm just going to put a light coating of grease on it to make sure I've got 100% coverage. And I'm putting it in with the crescent shaped relief for the ball socket facing up towards the slot. Next is the other half of the ball socket, making sure it's got 100% coverage on it, and put it in the correct direction, and again with the crescent shape up towards the elongated hole in the Centerlink. So next in is the spacer end cover and the spacer itself, and I'm going to use the spacer to push the first ball socket all the way up into place. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a lot of grease in both ends of the spacer. And then I'm going to use that grease to basically glue the end cover to it to hold it in place. The end cover again is the very delicate piece that if you try to push the end cover into the tube first and then try to feel your way in with this spacer, if the lip of the spacer catches the edge of the end cover, it can damage the end cover. So you want to literally glue the cover to the spacer. And I'll go ahead and fill in the spacer in the center section with a little bit of grease. And as you slide the spacer into the tube, you want to be sure that this flat area with the grease port lines up with where the Zerk fitting is going to be, right here. So you got a flat surface going right under the Zerk fitting. And as I was pushing the spacer in, I try not to bring it back out because I run the risk of the end cap coming off the spacer, and then that would defeat the purpose of using a spacer to push the end cap into place. Okay, so at this point you can see the ball sockets in place, and there's the end cap or the end cover for the spacer, and I can rotate the ball socket to make sure it's lined up in the elongated hole. And I'm going to separate them just a little bit, just enough to get the tie rod in place. I'm going to go ahead and install the tie rod. I'm going to put just a little bit of grease on the bottom side of the dust cover. And I have spread the ball socket apart a little bit. Put the dust cover in place. First put the spring on with the larger diameter down towards the Centerlink. Drop the tie rod in. Push down on it. And then kind of working it up and down very slightly. You can put a little pressure on this end of the spring and the stop plug, and you can feel it all kind of seat itself. You want to be sure it's seated and that you didn't pull anything back out to allow that cover to slip off the end of the spacer. So keeping pressure on the tie rod and a little bit of pressure on the spring and the spring plug, I rolled this thing over. I rolled it over so that I could get to the elongated hole for the idler arm. So I will put a little bit of grease on the ball socket again. Slide the ball socket half into place with the crescent facing outward towards the elongated hole. Then the same thing with the outer piece of the ball socket. Crescent shape facing the slot. Put a little bit of grease on the dust cover and put the dust cover on with this tab facing outwards. put the spring on with the large diameter towards the Centerlink. Go ahead and put some grease on the ball of the idler arm. And drop it into place. Push down on it and slide it inwards. Push the ball socket up tight. Put the adjusting end plug in. I'm keeping pressure on the ball socket of the idler arm while I do this. So you go ahead and tighten your end plug down, but before you tighten it down, look inside the hole where the Zerk fitting goes and make sure that the triangular shape of the spacer doesn't have one of the points right here in the hole, because it'll interfere with the installation of the Zerk fitting. You want the Zerk fitting to go in against a flat spot of the spacer. And incidentally, the grease port in the spacer lines up with this Zerk fitting, which will happen automatically. So you tighten the end cap down, and you tighten it down tight, and then you back it off a quarter to a half a turn and put your cotter pin in. And put your cotter pin in so that the eye of the pin is on the side facing the dust cover, because if you bend the legs of the cotter pin over, they may interfere with the movement of the dust cover. And the pitman arm is the same thing. Stop disc, little grease for glue, drop it in the hole up against the detent. End cover. Push down and pull it toward the center. Reach in here and push the spacer up tight against the ball socket here. I'm letting off real easy and making sure that the spacer doesn't try to kick back, because I don't want the end cover to come off the spacer. Next is half the ball socket. Goes right against the spacer. The other half of the ball socket. Now line the crescent shape relief of the ball socket up with the elongated keyhole, and I made sure that this ball socket didn't pop this way, so I know I've still got a little bit of pressure on everything. Alright, I've greased that, and again the tab faces outwards. And the large diameter of the spring goes towards the Centerlink. Should have already had this greased, but anyway, greasing the pitman arm. Making sure the tie rod is still pulled towards the center. Put the pitman arm in and also push it towards the center, push it down and towards the center. Keeping pressure on the whole assembly. And then greased the spring and the spring stop, and this time the spring stop, larger diameter, faces outwards against the adjusting end plug. And then finally, the adjusting end plug. Tighten it down nice and tight to seat everything, and back it off a quarter to a half a turn. And then the cotter pin. So if you look at the end plugs too, they're not in as far as the ones that originally came out. And the reason being, part of the reason is because of the ball cups are combined, the four pieces add 1/8 of an inch to the whole assembly. So that's why this is sticking out a little further. But what I'll do is when I put it in the car and drive the car a little bit, I'll recheck this adjustment on both sides, make sure nothing's loose. And make sure you can see the grease port in the spacer, just so you know you're on a flat spot on the spacer before you put your Zerk fitting in. Just got to put the tie rod ends on now, and it's ready to install.